visual here.
All right, Jeff Zimmerman here with Terry Lane, the son of the late great referee Mills Lane, and also the manager to Zhilei Zhang. That's the best I could do, Terry. Got a big fight March 8th in Saudi Arabia against Joseph Parker. What's going on, Terry?
Hey, happy to be here. Good to see you, Jeff. You're looking good. I'm here with the whole team is here, or nearly the whole team is here in Saudi Arabia. Got in a couple days ago and looking forward to next Friday. It's going to be should be a good fight against Parker.
Yeah, and it is, and we're going to talk about that fight. A lot of stuff going on, but I can't talk to you and not ask you about your dad, the legendary referee. Did so many legendary fights for my childhood and just growing up watching boxing. And if you can share some memories of your dad and just what it was like growing up under Mills Lane, let's get it on.
Well, gosh, man, I got so many stories. I mean, first of all, he was a great father. It was a great experience. Obviously, the reason my brother and I, who's my partner, are involved in boxing is because of our father. He was a very compassionate father. I think that, people saw the hard side of Mills Lane, but he had a soft side too. He was just a great dad. And, when I had it coming, I had it coming, but really didn't have to discipline us too much or anything like that. I've been to more fights than I can remember. I started going to fights out of the womb. Funny story is my mom's and dad's honeymoon was like a fight he had to referee in Las Vegas. So boxing has just been a constant in my life because of him. I remember the first fight I can remember the first fight I remember going to, he refereed. It was Pernell Whitaker versus Jorge Paez in Reno, my hometown. But then at a certain age, I got to go to all the big fights in Las Vegas that he would referee. And those are just some of my most treasured memories. And the first fight I went to in Las Vegas was the Fan Man fight, Riddick-Bowe Holyfield-Bowe II. So I got to see some of the crazy stuff. But it's just been a wild ride. We lost him in December of 2022. And, we just passed the year mark really of not having him. And it's something everybody goes through. But I think you need that year to kind of adjust. But he was just a great person, great father. And I can't say enough good things about him.
Yeah, and he was also in the Marines. I don't know if a lot of people know he was a fighter as well. Then obviously became kind of a TV star judge, Judge Mills Lane. When you were a kid and just growing up, and going to school and, boxing, was a lot bigger back then too. What was it like? Were you kind of a mini celebrity at school?
Well, it's funny because your perception of the world is so it's so different as a child. My dad when I was born, he was a district attorney in Washoe County, Reno, Nevada, where I'm from, and then he became a real district court judge. So he was kind of a public figure even before the huge national and worldwide fame came. So I thought as a kid, everybody's dad, tried, prosecuted criminals and then refereed fights on the weekend. I thought everybody's dad did that. It was just the normal thing to me. But he, when I was a kid, and I grew up in the same kind of era as you, the Tyson era, and he did I think about 8 of Tyson's fights, and we're talking pre-jail and post-prison for Tyson. And after the bite fight, there was this rumor in middle school for me that I had Holyfield's ear in my freezer that went around school. So it was my freshman year of high school when the TV show just started and stuff, and then he had this kind of new levels of fame. But he was not a Hollywood kind of guy, and if I had extra attention on me or my family, I didn't really know it. I kind of grew up with him being sort of a public figure anyway, so it was, I guess, an easy, for lack of a better word, transition. But I just because of him, I've got to do some of the coolest things in the world. I feel like the luckiest guy to have him as a dad, but I kind of didn't know any differently.
Right. Were you at the bite fight? I was going to ask you about that fight.
No, actually, and my dad was not. Let's call him frugal. We were not allowed to order the pay-per-view fights. And I don't know. There's a George Willis, the former writer of the New York Post, great guy. He wrote the book The Bite Fight, and he explains. He tells a story beautifully. My dad that morning woke up and did not. He woke up to Reno, Nevada. He was not assigned to the fight until that morning because Tyson's camp insisted on it. Mitch Halpern was supposed to referee that fight again I was at the first Holyfield-Tyson fight because my dad did the co-main, but we were not at that fight because my dad was not assigned to any of the fights in Las Vegas. He woke up that day just, as a normal human being citizen. So no, I was not at that fight. No.
Do you wish you were, looking back?
Yeah. I mean, it was such a crazy time. There was a point in time, and again, we were not allowed to get the pay-per-views, but the phone started ringing off the hook. My dad was famous because he was a public figure. He always listed, back in the day when we had phone books, kids, you won't know about this, but he always listed our home number because he felt he was a public servant. He should be reached at any time. So just our friends, family, weirdos, everybody started calling and we're like, something's going on. And I just remember one of my friends called me, you're missing this, you're missing this. And like put the phone speaker up to the television. And it took a couple of hours to even kind of assess what was going on. Again, this is pre-internet, pre social media for sure. And just I wish I was there just to say I was there, but what a wild experience.
Right. Now you're in Saudi. I know Mike is out there with Francis and Ngannou. You guys are obviously the co-main on that card. What have you spoke? I would imagine you've spoken to Mike, just being around him and such.
Well, I haven't seen him yet, and I hope I do get a chance to see him. But like, there was a moment in 2013 when my dad was inducted into the Nevada Boxing Hall of Fame, and Mike was there. It was the first inaugural year, and they had just the most beautiful moment where Mike came up. My dad was in a wheelchair. The effects of the stroke that happened in 2002 were very much set in for a decade at that point. And they just shared a wonderful moment. I'll never forget that. But Mike is a sweet guy, and it's my dad did so many. My dad did the fight where he fought Trevor Berbick and was the youngest. The record still stands, the youngest heavyweight champion ever. And just a lot of the big fights that he did with Mike, the McNeely fight, the Frank Bruno rematch. I was at that one. But yeah, if I get a chance to see him, I'd love to reintroduce myself. He sees so many people. I don't know if he'd remember me at all, but if I get a chance to, I'd love to.
I was at that 2013 Hall of Fame because I was working with Nevada Boxing, my association with Richard Steele, who is my mentor. And I actually got a picture with your dad and Richard, and I think Richard's wife Gladys, and it was such a great moment. And seeing him and Richard kind of, they were two of the best in the world. They were the best in the world.
They were, and I mean, in that era too that we've talked about and referred to, it's a special time in boxing. It was a special time in boxing.
No doubt. Well, listen, man, you've been making waves. I know you guys went on to promote. Let's Get It On Promotions. I think we even spoke back then about a fighter or two I was working with Richard on when you guys were doing shows in Reno. So it's been a lot of years, but let's talk about your association with Zhang. I mean, obviously, from China, 2008 silver medalist, Olympic silver medalist, massive dude. I mean, not your typical Chinese person, I would imagine. How did that association come about? It seems so random.
So I'll try to make this short, but so because of my dad's TV show, my family moved to New York, and I had some friends, and my brother had some friends from high school in mainland China and Macau. And so after we had finished school, or Tommy was still in school, my brother, we learned about this project where the Chinese government wanted help to transition their elite amateurs, because boxing wasn't really big in China. And, it took a couple generations for there to be any significant boxers in China. And the word got out that we had these connections in China. Someone reached out to us. We thought, hey, this sounds like a wonderful idea. And so to fast forward about 2012, 2013, we started working on the startup company called Dynasty Boxing, where we would go to China, we would meet with the officials, we'd meet with the fighters. And the idea was to bring them to the US, transition them into the pros, and kind of basically see where it goes. A couple twists and turns. There was a bad partner involved who did some bad things, created kind of a toxic environment. So we turned Zhilei pro in 2014. We had known him for a couple of years, built a lot of trust, had a great relationship. It's easy to find bad people in boxing, unfortunately. And he was ripped out of a good situation and put into a bad situation. He was considering retirement. And years later, my brother had the idea to reach out to him and say, hey, I think that Zhilei is probably not happy. And he wasn't. So we entered the picture as advisors because he already had a promotional contract with another entity. So we helped turn him pro. We helped transition him to turn pro, and then it kind of went nowhere. And then, long story short, here we are now. And we entered the picture again in about early 2019. And, again, I would like to get, I don't want to pat myself on the back, but the team we have, our attorney, Scott Schaefer, my partner, Kurt Lee, and my brother, Tommy, myself, we kind of turned the lights on in his career. He was fighting, but in front of no TV, in front of nobody, getting no publicity. And I'd like to think we did a pretty okay job at kind of resurrecting his career. I don't know if we had not entered the picture, we might not be having this conversation. We probably wouldn't be having this conversation, but we kind of got him out of that bad situation and into a good one. And here we are.
Yeah, because he's not a young guy. What is he, about 40 years old?
I'm like a month older than him, and I'm 40, so we're both turning 41 this year. But yes, correct.
Yeah, and I was going to ask you kind of that period because it seemed you've been around. He's been a pro for 10 years, but it seems like he's been around though for the last 5 years or so. Just super active. You see, he's been on a bunch of big cards. I guess that's why Canelo, Bivol, Kambosos, Teofimo. What else was he on? Usyk, Joshua too.
Yep.
So people have gotten to see him. I know he had the draw against Jerry Forrest, and then lost that kind of strange fight against Herigic, or however you pronounce it.
Hrgović, yeah.
Yeah. Take me back to that time when you're in that fight and you guys came up short after you got a knockdown in the fight.
Well, it's so funny because that fight was also in Saudi Arabia. It was in a different city, but it was also in Saudi Arabia. That was August of 2022. I've never felt heat like that in my life. And I mean, like the sun heat. It was a coin flip fight to refresh everybody's memory. It was a mandatory, it was for the mandatory spot in the IBF. It was for the number one spot. Hrgović was like 2 or 3. The top spots were blank, and then we were like 13. Zhang was like 13 on the list. IBF goes through their process, goes through everybody. Everybody said no. No one wanted to fight Phil Hrgović. He had this this reputation of just being this great amateur fighter, and no one wanted to fight him. It was a certain loss, and we said, "Shit, we'll do it." I mean, God, who are these cowards? List comes up, we accept the fight, we do the fight, and we thought it was kind of a 50-50 fight. We go to Saudi. Obviously, I'm sitting there. I'm seeing what I thought was a great performance by Zhilei, the best I'd ever seen him. We have him down early in the fight, and when the decision was read, I've never heard boos like that. I mean, I've been to hundreds of fight shows where I've seen a lot of bad decisions. I've never heard a whole arena boo. Again, it wasn't even a main event; it was a co-main. I've never heard boos like that. And then in the aftermath of that, it's like we won the fight, but we didn't get our hand raised. That was our last fight with Matchroom. The aftermath of it, I think we asked 20 riders what they thought. A couple people had it like a draw. I had one guy that said, I won't name names, that had Hrgović winning, but it was like something like 85% of everybody else had us winning by a point or two, which I thought was fair. So it was disappointing, but it also was the fight that kind of gave us that boost and put us on the map. We took a fight no one wanted. We performed well. We should have gotten our hand raised, and we didn't. And then we sat down with Queensberry in London a couple months later, and they said, "What do you think about Dubois? What do you think about Joyce?" And we said, "Hey, let's do Joyce." And obviously, we know what happened with those two fights, and now here we are against another veteran.
Why Joyce back to back? Remind me of the reason you guys fought him. I mean, big dude, heavy-handed guy. Obviously, your guy's big and heavy-handed. But why take a chance with him in back-to-back fights?
So we exit the contract with Matchroom. We just had the performance against Hrgović, and again, we sat down with Queensberry. We looked at the landscape of the heavyweight division, and no one was really rushing to fight us either. But I want to refresh people of the perception of Joe Joyce. Everybody thought we were insane for taking that fight. Granite chin, just knocked out Joe Parker. Joe Parker had never been stopped. We were like a kind of stay busy fight for him. But when we went back to our trainer and said, Sean George, who's just a brilliant trainer who now is his phone's blowing up. Everybody wants to train with him, understandably. Sean George said, I like Joyce. I like the style. It took about 2 minutes of convincing me that this is the way to go. We made the fight, but we had to agree to a rematch clause to get the fight. this happens in boxing all the time. We have that same protection with Joe Parker in this fight. It happens in boxing. Some people like it, some people don't. I understand both sides of it. But no one wanted to fight Joe Joyce. We not only did we beat him, we stopped him. And there was talk about us fighting Tyson Fury in July in London. It was an option of whether or not Joe Joyce could. It was on him to ask for the rematch. He had to formally request it, but we gave him the option of requesting it not as the next fight. It could have been 2 or 3 fights down. So we were kind of hoping that's what would happen, but he asked for it immediately. And then, so unfortunately the Tyson Fury fight didn't happen. We go back to London in September, and, we stop him at the very end of the 3rd round.
He's WBO interim heavyweight champion, now fighting Joseph Parker, who, sometimes he seems to be counted out a lot too. And then all of a sudden he bounces back, and he kind of blew up the heavyweight division by dominating Deontay Wilder, right? I mean, it's just, you just never know with the heavyweights, it seems like. Is he now finally in that position with the win against Parker March 8th that he'll get that big shot he's hoping for?
Well, we'll hope so. I mean, the thing about it's hard to make plans because, Usyk was supposed to fight Fury. The cut happens. Fury looked bad against Ngannou. Usyk, controversial win against Dubois. Obviously, everybody was trying to make AJ and Wilder. Parker's the spoiler there. So I always kind of equated, the heavyweight division or boxing in general is kind of like a game of musical chairs, and you don't want to be the last one standing when the music ends. We honestly, if we win on Friday or next Friday, I don't know what's next. There are rematch clauses on both sides for Fury and Usyk. We would love to fight Fury or AJ. AJ is probably our top choice. So if he gets through on next Friday and we get through it next Friday, we would make a push to make that fight. I'm not optimistic that it would happen because we had many chances to fight Anthony Joshua and it just never materialized. And you're going to have to ask his team about that. I don't want to speak on that because, well, frankly, he doesn't want it, I don't think. But I think we've earned a big fight. I just don't know what the next fight would look like after March 8th if Zhilei is victorious. Wilder is still a name. I would love for him to get a win and maybe come back. There was some talk about us fighting Wilder on this date. But, Parker's the one who we made the fight with. And so we just got to see how things shake out, really, Jeff. It's just one of those things. You can never really make plans in boxing.
Yeah. Who wants to fight a 6'6" southpaw heavyweight? I mean,
who can really punch and box a little? I mean, yeah, no one's, we're kind of the boogeyman. I mean, no one really is rushing to fight us, understandably. But thankfully with like Turki Al-Sheikh, his excellency here, he's using a good war chest to cut through the red tape and just get people in the ring. And kind of boxing needs that shot in the arm. And so it's an exciting period. I hope this continues.
I was talking to Michael Moore about a week ago. He just got elected to he's going in the 2024 class International Boxing Hall of Fame. And, he made the jump from light heavyweight to heavyweight, had the fight with Holyfield, and obviously the big George Foreman fight. Will always be tied to him. But he talked about, back then guys then were a lot smaller, and, there should be a super heavyweight division, kind of like what was in the Olympics when John was fighting. What are your thoughts on that? Because today's guys are so massive.
They are massive. I don't have a strong opinion on it either way, Jeff. I think you can make a good case for it, though. I mean, for example, if we end up fighting Usyk, we're the interim champion. If we win on Friday, Usyk would have to win his fight against Fury, which is not given. But pretend that we fight Usyk, we're fighting a guy who is a former cruiserweight. I mean, there's going to be 60 pounds of difference in the fight. So, but you did have this with Primo Carnera. I mean, you did have he I think beat Tommy Laughlin in Miami, and there was a 60-pound difference then. I mean, you could make a case for it. I'll just put it that way.
Yeah, and I guess going back to Michael Moore, I asked, with George Foreman, there was a huge, I think, probably 50-pound difference there. He was dominating the fight until he wasn't, until he was laid out on the canvas. So
that one shot, that one right hand,
that one right hand. He says he saw it coming, but then, maybe he's just convinced himself over the years too. So he kind of joked.
Maybe he's seen the tape too many times.
Exactly. And we'll wrap up here in a second. again here with Terry Lane. I always got to, tie you in with your dad. I'm respectfully this, son of the late
I love
great
it.
Mills Lane, legendary referee during the heyday of boxing, as far as I'm concerned, my youth. But just real quick, Terry, talk about, we kind of alluded to it a little bit, but boxing today versus then, HBO is gone, Showtime is gone. I talk to my dad all the time, who's 82, who tells me, reminds me, even though his memory's going bad, seeing Sugar Ray Robinson at the old Chicago Stadium as a kid, things like that he never forgets. Talk about where boxing is today back, when we were kind of growing up in the sport and with your dad and so forth.
Well, just because I've been around the sport, I'm a little bit of I would say, an amateur boxing historian. And if you really look at the history, let's say boxing as we know it is roughly 100 years old. There have always been peaks and valleys. And I can never remember if it's Larry Merchant or Jim Lampley, but it's the great quote of boxing will never die and no one can ever save it. Boxing will always have peaks and valleys. I think we're on an upswing now because I think there's a key element. I don't know what to attribute it to, if it's social media or something else, but I think we've recaptured some youth in terms of the fan base. I think we lost a lot of that to MMA in the 2000s, and I think there was kind of on a downslide. I could talk about this for hours with you. I'm sure you have opinions as well, but I think we're capturing and kind of getting that base of the youthful fan base, the audience worldwide. But I never thought you and I would, a few years ago, if you were to say, Terry, you're going to talk with Jeff and there's going to be a day where Showtime and HBO don't exist and they're not involved in boxing, I'd been like, oh, you're crazy. Get out of town. But here we are. And that is the case. Boxing seems to be more global. You're having champions from Asia, my guy, you got Inoue, you got the Japanese guys. You have the streaming services, which, I don't next to me, but like, as long as you can get a fan someplace in some corner of the earth to watch a fight like that, which now you can, that's a good thing. But does it compare to the 80s and 90s? It just doesn't. And it's something I can't really put words to, but it's like a feeling. I was at the Crawford, I don't know if at the Crawford Spence fight, I see the credential behind you. That was the first time in a long time I felt like that, like late 80s, early 90s Vegas big fight feel in a long time. So I'm going to be a little optimistic and say I think will it ever get back to that era? I don't know. We do need stars. Here's another thing. My brother and I were having a conversation about this the other day. We were coming back from the sparring session with Zhilei, and my brother made a great point. Everybody talks about who's the face of boxing. Well, you know what? If there's one person who's the face of boxing, that is horrible for boxing. You need a lot of stars in boxing. Did we ever talk about who's the face of boxing when Leonard, Hearns, Hagler, and Duran were fighting? No, they were all the face of boxing, and none of them the face of boxing. You need stars. You need the matchups. You need the dance partners. When Mayweather, and I think that's the era that came up when the term, he might even coin the term face of boxing. That's not good. That's not one guy who's just going to, pick opponents, and that's not good. So all this talk about who's the face of boxing, all that stuff I see in social media about the debates about that are such BS. We need stars. I see some emerging stars, just the interest in the guys like, for better or worse, Haney, Garcia, Tank, Shakur. You have a lot of stars now. And so just because of that, I think we're on an upswing, and I have an optimistic outlook for the next 5 years.
Yeah, and it's interesting, the people that I hang around with, my friends, know none of these people. And that's kind of the sad part about it, I guess. Unless it was Mike Tyson or Mayweather or someone like that. But yeah, I agree. Boxing's not going anywhere anytime soon. And
right. You make a good point though, because I just talked about regaining the base of the youth, the youthful, the young fans. We don't want to lose the older fans, the people who aren't on TikTok and the people who did consume by watching HBO, and they had their HBO and Showtime subscriptions, and they were used to buying the occasional pay-per-view. We don't want to lose them as well, but I do just see a shifting, growing fan base that is starting younger, which I think is ultimately a net positive. But you don't want to turn your back on the people who made boxing great, the fans who made boxing great in the 80s and 90s.
Yeah, and real quick, you know, people ask me about Jake Paul all the time, and I always my response is I'll never knock the hustle. And you know, I heard someone yesterday talking about him where at first they were like down on him, and now look at all these great things he's doing, especially for women's
Yeah.
boxing, and he's serious. I mean, he's serious about the sport and helping the sport, and I think it's great what he's doing and getting that younger generation like a Ryan Garcia and you know and some of these young guys with social media, like you said.
I agree with you. Anything to get eyeballs on the sport is ultimately a good thing if it's done in a way where it's serious and not a joke. And like you said, this guy Jake Paul is taking it serious. I mean, look what he's done for Amanda Serrano. Look, you know, forget his fights. He's signing guys, and they're doing serious things. They have a big show coming up this weekend. So I tend to agree with you, Jeff.
You have a big show coming up too, Terry. Friday night, your heavyweight back in Saudi against Joseph Parker. What should we expect from him? You know, how has he been looking, and what should we expect? I bet fireworks.
Well, you know, listen, I don't. A 40-year-old fighter is not supposed to get better. That's not supposed to happen. But I am seeing it happen firsthand. Every camp that Zhilei has, he improves more. Sean George is just a brilliant trainer, putting together these game plans and playbooks for these fights. We respect the heck out of Joseph Parker. He's a veteran, former world champion. He's younger than us. I call him a veteran, but he's got more miles on him than we do. He does some very tricky things, very nuanced things very well, but Zhilei's prepared for all of them. I would expect Zhilei, my prediction would be a mid fight stoppage for Zhilei. But anything can happen. It's heavyweight boxing. Anything can happen. Joe's got some pop too. Got a pretty good chin. So we'll see. But it's heavyweight boxing and it's exciting. It's dramatic.
Well, man, I'm glad we did this. It's great seeing you. And good luck, and hope to see him in a big world title fight after this, if all goes well. And you know, up there against one of those big boys like Joshua Wilder, Fury, I think it would be great for him, obviously you guys, but the sport itself.
I appreciate that, Jeff. Yeah, he's opening up a boxing to you know, a couple billion people around the world, especially in China. He's a hero there now. So what he's doing is pretty special. I'm just happy to be a small cog in the wheel. But I appreciate the well wishes, and we're gonna give it hell on Friday.
Sounds good, man. We'll do this again soon.
Will do. Thanks, Jeff.
All right, thanks, Terry.